Cowboy Bebop has been out on Netflix for a few weeks now. It's a live action adaptation of one of the most beloved anime shows of all time. Like all anime adaptations, this one seemed bound to fail from the get go, and it's actually something I want to start with. I don't really get why Hollywood seems so insistent on adapting so many successful animated properties in the first place to live action. If you have an amazing work of art, why would you desperately try to move it to a different medium where you can't necessarily do the same things and have it work? The sad explanation is that I do get why they're doing that, and it's that a lot of people don't consider animation a worthy, so to speak, medium in the first place. I think there's a fairly common opinion, misconception, that animation is for kids only, which is completely absurd because it's as if you said that photography is for adults and painting is for kids. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The medium in no way dictates the nature of the content of the art. So I would love it if more people were more accepting of animation as a medium and be more open to discovering that it can feature a lot of adult stories, because it certainly can, and it does carry a lot of adult content. Now, onto this specific case. Cowboy Bebop is a show which mixes elements of science fiction, detective stories, western, film noir, and comedy. It's about a bunch of fucked up people on a spaceship. Each of them has a certain baggage related to their past, and they all try to sort of come together and make their way in this vast universe as interplanetary bounty hunters. The anime used a mostly serialized form to tell a new story each episode, with some plot lines related specifically to the main cast being more overarching and showing up several times over the course of the show. Most notably, the past of Spike Spiegel, a former assassin for the criminal organization named the Syndicate. Also, the anime was very tied to music. Yoko Kanno famously made the soundtrack with her band called Seatbelts. It mixed a lot of different genres, but taking heavily, especially from jazz. And in fact, each episode title had a relation to a specific, either a song or a musical genre. And a lot of the tone of that episode was dictated by the music as well. It was a very integral part of the show. Now, on to the live action. I will try to be as forgiving and honest as I can. I think that if you take the show in a vacuum, forget that it adapts the anime and just treat it as its own thing, then I think it's not completely garbage. If you can accept the goofy, stylized, overdrawn nature of it all, there are some things to enjoy. The production design isn't horrible, characters have okay-ish chemistry, the music, done once again by Yoko Kanno's fantastic Seatbelts, is nothing short of amazing. However, as an adaptation, this whole thing can be described with one word, and that word is a misunderstanding. The live-action version seems to completely misunderstand, completely miss the point in terms of what was so great about the original, making so many unnecessary changes that end up ruining the source material. I won't go through every single one of them because I would have to dedicate a couple of hours to this rant, so let's just check some of the key things. First of all, the characters. The anime has 4 main characters. The live show has 3, omitting Radical Ed. If you've seen the anime, you can kind of understand why. She was a completely bonkers character that sort of worked in anime because you can get away with a lot more stuff in animation. But this could never work in live action. The character would just be too much if they adapted it straight up. So I was fine with the omission. I thought, okay, they could change the character somewhat, but they would probably ruin it in a different way. So I'm fine with the omission, even though it takes away some of the character dynamics. Right up until the final episode, where Ed actually does show up in the very last scene of the show, in a sort of teaser for season 2. And it's the most cringe I felt in years. The character ends up even more exaggerated than in the anime, believe it or not. I mean, it's just so baffling. Why would you omit her from the entire show and then actually put her there in the end for no reason at all? As for the rest of the cast, there's been a fair bit of talk about the casting. The main trio is all around 10 years older than the characters they're supposed to be playing, and actually John Cho, who is playing Spike, is about 15 years older than the character. I could kind of accept that still, especially as Spike's costume looks cool and Jet Black is cast almost perfectly. And I sort of get the explanation from the showrunners that, seeing as how much past these characters had, they wanted to age them up so that they would appear more, more experienced, more ravaged by life. But there are problems, and problems start with Faye, who I think is completely miscast, but also written horribly. For some reason, she is now swearing all the time and making sex jokes in every episode, which is baffling. I think maybe it's the American way of making things adult, so to speak. Put sex talk and swearing in there and you're good to go. Which is another way of ruining the original anime, because it had a certain sort of elegance to it, a certain class that you could feel. It certainly never resorted to swearing or poor sex jokes to make things interesting. Now, Faye is the most obnoxious one, but the problems actually extend to all other characters as well, the other two of the main cast, and it has to do with their general feel. See, in the anime, they were all kind of aloof, cool, and not caring. They were always slightly above what was going on, relaxed and in control, which then made the episodes where they have to deal with their own past hit all the more hard, because suddenly there was a contrast in how serious they became. This show misses the mark. There is no aloofness. Instead, everyone is shouting all the time and being an asshole to one another. There are also issues with the side characters. I want to mention Gren, which in the anime was this fascinating, tragic character who only shows up for 2 episodes, but the episodes with him were probably my favorite in the entire show. In the live-action version, he's just some weird, gender non-specific dude who doesn't have almost anything particularly interesting to do. And then we get to Vicious and Julia, and I don't even know where to start. In the anime, both are mysterious figures from Spike's past. We know very little about them, and it's a deliberate choice. Vicious is meant to be this boogeyman, represents Spike's past and his past sins coming back and threatening to catch up with him. Whereas Julia is this romantic figure, this idealized goal, a dream to aspire to. In the live-action version, they both get a lot of screen time, a whole backstory, and the current-day plotline as well, which is absolutely terrible. Vicious in anime was an unstoppable force of nature, a badass, almost a demon, you could say. Live-action version is basically a dweeb Draco Malfoy, a weak man with daddy issues. Seeing him is just pure cringe, and Julia is given a lot of characterization as well, which is all over the place and makes her character fairly inconsistent from scene to scene, but also removes all of the mystique. I mean, both these characters worked in the anime because they were enigmas. The more we know about them, the less enticing they become. And of course, it doesn't help that they're not written very well at all, and it's painful to get through their scenes, which are littered throughout the show, through all the episodes of the show. And this brings me to my next point. Having the Syndicate be so involved in the events of the show and tying them to various bounties, which in the anime were almost always totally random, makes the world seem so much smaller. In the anime, it always seemed like the Bebop crew was just this tiny, tiny element of a huge world which had so much going on inside of it. These characters were largely inconsequential to the grand scheme of things. They were just trying to survive on their own. They had their own little stories. Whereas the live-action shows makes the world seem so small because everything is tied to the same group of characters, to the same syndicate, to the same couple of locations over and over. Listen, I could go on and on about how disappointed I am, but I'll just wrap it up by talking about the ending. The anime had a very definite ending, bittersweet in many ways, but also closing the storylines for good. The live-action version ends in a way that doesn't resolve absolutely anything, and instead teases another season, which, first of all, would probably be terrible, especially now that the showrunners have essentially run out of material to adapt. But thankfully, we don't have to worry about that, because just today it has been announced that the show has been cancelled for good, in a wonderful twist of irony. So that means I will no longer have to subject myself to suffering through a terrible adaptation of a fantastic existing work of art. And so as not to end on a pessimistic note, the original anime is also available in full on Netflix, so if you haven't checked it out, be sure to do so. It's amazing in so many ways, and I think it can be enjoyed even if you dislike anime as a whole.